The knock came at 7:14 on a Thursday night, the exact kind of ordinary sound that can split your life in two. I remember because I was standing in my kitchen with a bag of groceries in one hand and my phone in the other, arguing with my husband, Noah, about whether he'd eaten anything besides coffee all day. I remember because I was barefoot, because the sink was full of dishes, because rain was sliding down the windows in thin silver lines, and because I thought, absurdly, that the knock meant the takeout I had ordered an hour earlier had finally arrived. So I opened the door, expecting a delivery guy. Instead, I found a man in a dark coat, soaked at the shoulders, holding a manila envelope against his chest like it mattered more than his own heartbeat. He looked to be in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Tired eyes, clean-shaven, serious in a way that made my stomach tighten before he even spoke. "Mrs. Bennett?" he asked. I frowned. "Yes?" He glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. "My name's Grant Mercer. I'm a private investigator." For a second, I actually laughed, because people do not stand on your porch in the rain and announce they're private investigators unless they are either very confused or about to ruin your life. "I think you have the wrong house," I said. He held up the envelope. "Your parents hired me to look into your marriage." The air left the room so fast I felt dizzy. He said it calmly, like he was telling me the weather, but my mind latched onto only one word: parents. I hadn't spoken to my father in 6 weeks. My mother had called 3 times in that same period, each time leaving a voicemail that sounded concerned enough to be poisonous. Grant watched me carefully. "I know this is not how anyone expects to hear something like this, but I need to talk to you. Not here." I didn't move. "You're telling me my parents hired a stranger to spy on my marriage?" "Yes." "Why?" His mouth tightened. "Because they believe your husband is hiding something." That made a sharp, bitter sound rise in my throat. "My parents believe a lot of things." He looked down at the envelope, and then back at me. "I also believe they're using this to get to your inheritance." I stared at him. Rain ticked against the porch railing. Somewhere inside the house, my phone buzzed again with Noah's name flashing on the screen. But I couldn't look away from the man standing there with my family's secrets in his hands. I should have shut the door. I should have told him to leave. Instead, I stepped aside and said, in a voice that did not feel like mine, "Come in." He walked into my home carrying the kind of silence that changes everything. Noah was still calling from the kitchen when I found him. The screen lit up with his name again and again, but I didn't answer. I just stood there and listened. To Grant Mercer lay his envelope on our table like a weapon. "I'll get straight to it," he said. "Your father contacted my office 4 months ago. He said he was worried about your husband's finances, your safety, and your judgment. He wanted proof your husband was unfaithful or financially exploiting you. He was very specific about wanting something that could be used in a legal proceeding." I felt my skin go cold. "My father doesn't even like Noah enough to use his name in a sentence," I said. Grant gave me a look that was almost pity. "He used it." I crossed my arms because otherwise I think I would have collapsed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I don't think your father was honest with me, and because I think someone in your family is trying to make you think your husband is betraying you when the real betrayal is coming from inside your own house. There are moments in life when your brain fights to protect you by refusing to understand what your ears have heard. That was one of those moments. My marriage had been under pressure for years, but not because Noah was cruel, not because I had stopped loving him, because my parents had never stopped punishing me for choosing him. Noah Bennett was a public defender with tired eyes and kind hands. He grew up in a brick duplex on the west side of Columbus, with a father who drove trucks and a mother who worked nights as a pharmacy tech. He wore the same 2 winter coats until one of them finally split at the seam. He had a habit of reading case files in bed with one sock on because he always lost the other one. He made me tea when I had migraines, fixed the broken latch on our back door with a screwdriver from his glove compartment, and apologized to waiters when my mother's voice in my head made me too tense to order dessert. He was the best thing that had ever happened to me, and my parents hated him for exactly that reason. To them, love was supposed to be strategic. My father, Richard Collins, owned a chain of assisted living facilities that had been in the family for decades. My mother, Vivian, had turned our surname into a lifestyle brand without ever saying the word brand out loud. They lived in a house so large that guests got lost looking for the powder room. They gave out Christmas gifts like they were issuing contracts. When I told them I was marrying Noah, my father had leaned back in his leather chair and asked, "Is this a phase or a rebellion?" My mother had smiled, the kind of smile that never touched her eyes, and said, "Mara, he's very charming, but charm doesn't build legacies." They both thought I would eventually come back, embarrassed and grateful. The way you return a sweater that looked better in the store than it did on your body. Instead, I moved into a 2-bedroom rental with a cracked porch, a temperamental heater, and a man who loved me without trying to own me. And because my grandmother, Evelyn Collins, had been the only person in my family who understood the difference, she left me a trust. That trust was supposed to be my independence. My parents called it an unnecessary complication. The trust included a significant sum of money, yes, but more than that, it held controlling interests in 2 properties my grandmother had bought before my father ever convinced himself he'd built the family empire alone. Grandma Evelyn had been the quiet spine of the whole thing. She kept records, she read contracts, she knew where the bodies were buried, financially speaking. And before she died, she told me one thing in the hospital, while my parents were out in the hall pretending to arrange flowers. "Never let them make you confuse fear with love, Mara." I had clung to those words for years, but standing in my kitchen while Grant Mercer pulled glossy photographs from his envelope, I felt fear crowding every clean thought I had left. He spread the pictures across the table. Noah leaving a hotel. Noah standing outside a coffee shop. Noah opening the passenger door for a woman with red hair. Noah smiling at her. Noah carrying a paper bag into a building I didn't recognize. I looked at the photos for a long time without speaking, because if I opened my mouth, something inside me would crack. "That woman," Grant said carefully, "is not who your father wants you to think she is." I swallowed hard. "Who is she?" "Claire Bennett, your husband's sister." I blinked. "He doesn't have a sister." Grant slid one of the photos closer. "Apparently he does, and apparently your husband has been helping her through treatment at Street Agnes Cancer Center for the last 5 months. I stared at him. That was the moment Noah came into the kitchen, still holding his phone, still mid-call, and saw the photos spread across our table. He stopped so abruptly, he nearly dropped the phone. "Mara?" he said. His eyes moved from the pictures to me, and the blood drained from his face. "What is this?" I had no idea then that the betrayal would not come from the marriage my parents were trying to destroy. It would come from the decades before it. Noah set his phone down slowly. "Why are there pictures of me?" "Your wife's parents hired me," Grant said. "They wanted proof of infidelity." Noah stared at him like he'd spoken in another language. Then he turned to me. "You think I'm cheating on you?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to trust the man I had shared a bed and a bank account and too many late-night grocery runs with. But the pictures were right there. The red hair, the hotel, the smiles, the lies my family had spent years planting in my head suddenly found sunlight, and every old wound began to ache at once. Noah took one step toward me and stopped when I stepped back. That hurt more than the photos. "I was going to tell you," he said quietly. There it was. Not denial, not outrage, not some quick, clever explanation. "I was going to tell you." My voice came out thin. "Tell me what?" He looked at Grant. "Did they show you the whole story, or just enough to scare her?" Grant didn't answer. Noah let out a breath through his nose, exhausted and furious all at once. "Claire is my half-sister. We found each other 3 years ago after our mother died. She didn't tell anyone because she didn't want pity, and I didn't tell Mara because every time I've mentioned anything about my family, her parents use it against me. They'd twist it. They always do." I laughed once, sharply, because it sounded easier than crying. "So you decided to keep a whole sister secret from me?" I was trying to protect her. "From what?" His jaw tightened. "From your father." The room seemed to tilt. Grant looked up sharply at that, and Noah knew he'd said too much. I saw it in the way his shoulders went rigid. My mother called at that exact moment. I looked at the phone lighting up on the counter, her name glowing under the wet rain reflection on the window. Then I looked at Noah. Then I looked at Grant Mercer, who had brought my marriage into my kitchen and was now staring at my husband like he was suddenly not the only man in the room with dangerous information. I answered the call on speaker because something in me had already crossed over into a place where I needed witnesses. "Hello, Mom." "Mara, thank goodness." Her voice was all silk and false relief. "I've been trying to reach you. Your father and I are very concerned." My laugh this time was ugly. "About what?" "About Noah. We've heard some troubling things." I turned my head and looked at the photos on the table. "From who?" A pause. Just one beat too long. Then my mother said, "We only want to protect you." I looked at Noah, who stared back with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger. Hewitt. Deep, old hurt. My mother kept talking, her voice smooth and practiced. "We've arranged dinner tomorrow. Just the family. We need to discuss some financial matters and a few concerns we have about your marriage." "Concerns like what?" I asked. Another pause. "Mara, don't make this difficult." There it was again. The same language my father used. The same command disguised as love. Grant's eyes stayed on me. Noah's did too. "I'm not coming," I said. "You're upset," my mother replied too quickly. "We can understand that, but this is for your own good." "No," I said, suddenly seeing every line in the picture at once. "It's for yours." The silence on the line hardened. Then my mother said very softly, "Grant Mercer should not be in your home." My whole body went cold. I looked at Grant. "You told her your name?" "No," he said immediately. "I didn't speak to her." "You hired me 4 months ago, Mara," my mother said, and I realized the call was still on speaker. "Your father and I know exactly who we hired, and we know how this looks. You've been under stress. We wanted to understand what was happening before you made any irreversible mistakes." "What mistakes?" "Your husband is not your family." Noah shut his eyes for a second, as if he'd been hit. My mother continued, each word measured and elegant. "And your grandmother's trust is still pending certain clarifications. We were hoping to resolve this privately." There it was. The real reason. My inheritance. I looked at Noah. "You knew this was about the trust?" He didn't answer fast enough. It was only half a second. Half a second was enough. "Did you?" I asked. He rubbed a hand over his face. "Not all of it." "Then what did you know?" His voice dropped. "Enough to know your father started asking questions after your grandmother's old attorney said the trust could not be touched unless you remained legally married and retained independent control over it. Your parents don't want you divorced, Mara. They want you destabilized." My mother must have heard that because she cut back in, sharper now. "Noah has always been manipulative, dear. We've warned you." "No," I said, feeling something in me sharpen into steel. "You warned me that I'd be poor, that I'd regret this, that he'd use me. You've never once warned me about yourself." That landed. I heard it in her silence. Then my father's voice came on the line, and all the cold elegance vanished. "Bring the PI and your husband to dinner tomorrow," he said. "We're not having this discussion over the phone." "Why?" I asked. "Because I'm done being patient." He hung up. The room went still again. Rain battered the windows harder now, and Noah reached for me, but I flinched away so fast it shocked us both. I hated that I had done it. I hated that I had been trained by years of my parents' cruelty to treat love like a trap. Grant cleared his throat. "Mrs. Bennet, there's something else you should know." I looked at him. He was no longer just a stranger on my porch. He was a man standing in the wreckage of my life, carrying a file he didn't want anymore. "I've done surveillance work before," he said. "People hire me when they think someone is lying to them. Most of the time, they want a simple story, a cheating spouse, a hidden account, a scandal." He tapped the envelope with one finger. "But your father didn't just want proof. He wanted leverage. He asked me to collect anything that could be used to challenge your competence, your judgment, even your fitness to control the trust." My stomach lurched. Noah said, "You're saying he wanted to declare her unstable?" Grant nodded once. "I'm saying he wanted a paper trail." My mother had always called herself protective. My father had always called himself practical. What they really were, I realized in that terrible moment, was patient. Patient enough to wait for the right angle. Patient enough to build a cage with paperwork instead of bars. I sat down very slowly because my knees had started to shake. Noah crouched in front of me. "Mara, I swear to you, I never cheated on you. Claire is real. She's my sister. She got sick, and I helped her because nobody else would. I kept it quiet because I was trying to keep your family out of it." I looked at him through a blur I refused to call tears. "And the hotel?" Her oncologist was in the hotel conference wing for a weekend consult. It was easier for her to rest there than to go back and forth from the clinic. I met her with prescriptions and groceries. That's all. You should have told me. I know. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a long moment. Because every time your father wants to hurt me, he starts by making me look like a thief or a liar. I thought if I kept Claire private, I was protecting both of us. I didn't realize I was making the exact same kind of mistake your parents make. I'm sorry. I wanted to hate him for saying the right thing too late. Instead, I heard my grandmother's voice in my head. Never let them make you confuse fear with love. Fear had put all of us in this room. Fear had convinced Noah that silence was safer than trust. Fear had convinced me that my parents' approval was a currency I could eventually earn. And fear, I realized, was exactly what they had hired Grant Mercer to sell back to me. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house with Noah in the passenger seat and Grant Mercer in the back, because if my life was going to implode, I wanted every lie in the car with me. The house looked the same as always from the outside. Stone pillars, trimmed hedges, a driveway longer than some people's entire street. But the moment I walked in, I felt it. The cold confidence of people who believe they've already won. My mother was waiting in the foyer in a cream-colored suit, so perfect it looked expensive enough to insult someone. My father stood near the staircase with his hands clasped behind his back, as if he were receiving guests at a private club. And there, seated in one of the living room chairs with her legs crossed and a folder in her lap, was my younger sister Elise. Elise looked up when she saw me and immediately looked away. That told me more than her whole face would have. "Finally," my father said. "You're late." "I'm here," I replied. He glanced at Noah as though he were debris brought in on my shoes, then at Grant. "And you brought him. You hired him," I said. My mother's smile sharpened. "We were trying to help you." "By spying on me?" "By finding out whether you were making a terrible mistake," she said. Noah stayed quiet beside me. That alone would have been difficult for him. He wanted to argue. I could feel it. But he had learned, probably the hard way, that people like my parents fed on reaction. My father stepped forward. "We found evidence that your husband has been lying." "No," I said. "You found evidence that he has a sister." His jaw tightened. "A sister he didn't disclose." "A sister with cancer," Noah said evenly. "A sister who didn't want to be turned into a family discussion over cocktails." My mother clicked her tongue. "Such drama." Grant opened his folder. "I have the initial reports your husband asked for, Mr. Collins. I also have the revised reports you pressured me to submit." The room changed. My father didn't move. "I don't know what you're talking about." Grant looked at him without blinking. "You wanted me to state that Mr. Bennett was meeting a woman at a motel, and that the meetings were frequent and suggestive. You also wanted me to include language about financial instability." I refused. My father gave a low, incredulous laugh. "You're a private investigator, not a priest." "Actually," Grant said, "I'm a licensed investigator, and I'm also the man who refused to forge evidence for your divorce strategy." My mother turned to me, her expression composed but brittle around the edges. "Mara, darling, he's exaggerating." "No," I said. "He isn't." Elise spoke then, barely above a whisper. "It's true." Every head in the room turned to her. She lifted her eyes to my father, then to me. "I saw the messages." My father's face went flat. "What messages?" "The ones you sent the attorney," Elise said. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. "The ones saying if Mara stayed married, the trust would remain protected from your control. The one saying if she divorced, you'd petition for oversight and claim she was under emotional strain. You said Noah was the problem that would solve itself. My mother's lips parted. Elise? No, Elise said, suddenly louder. I am done being told to be quiet. That shocked me so much, I nearly forgot to breathe. Elise had spent her whole life being the good daughter, the polished one, the one who never contradicted them, never gave them a reason to sharpen their attention. Seeing her stand up felt like watching a lamp turn on in a locked room. My father's voice lowered into something dangerous. Sit down. She didn't. He took one step toward her, and Noah stepped forward at the same time. Don't, Noah said. My father looked at him with open contempt. You don't tell me what to do in my house. No, Noah replied, but apparently your own daughter does. I saw it then, before the explosion of it all. My father wasn't just angry because I had brought witnesses. He was angry because witnesses were the one thing money couldn't entirely control. Grant set another document on the coffee table. There's also the matter of the Collins Foundation transfers. My mother's face changed at that. That was the real crack in the wall. I looked at her. What transfers? Her expression was smooth, but her hand had tightened around her folder. This is not the time. No, I said. It's exactly the time. Grant opened the file and began placing pages on the table one by one. Over the past 9 months, several payments were made from the foundation account to shell vendors, consulting fees, renovation reimbursements, and a project labeled Evelyn Review. At my grandmother's name, my breath stopped. Grandma Evelyn had been dead for 2 years. My father's jaw clenched. Those are internal bookkeeping matters. Grant's gaze remained steady. There are also evidence of embezzlement if the invoices are false, which, in this case, they are. My mother's composure finally slipped. That's absurd. Is it? Grant asked. Because I found the same vendor names tied to a property trust in Franklin County, and I found emails instructing your assistant to move money before the quarterly board review. I also found a draft letter requesting that your daughter be assessed for emotional instability after a marital separation. The room went very still. My mother stared at the papers as if they had insulted her personally. My father's voice was low now, almost conversational, which was worse. You went through our records. I went through what you tried to use against your daughter, Grant said. There's a difference. My father looked at me then, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his face that was not confidence. I saw calculation. He was deciding what could still be salvaged. Mara, he said, and used my first name like a man trying to coax a wild animal. Your mother and I were trying to protect you from a man who could have taken advantage of you. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. By stealing from my grandmother's trust? That money should have stayed in the family. It is in the family, I snapped. I am family. You married outside the family, he said, and you hired someone to spy on my bedroom. The sound that came out of my mother was sharp and horrified. Mara. No, I said, and now I was shaking for real, but I didn't care. Don't Mara me like this is about manners. You dragged my marriage through the mud because you wanted to control me. You lied about Noah. You tried to turn my inheritance into a leash, and you used my sister as a witness because you thought she'd stay silent. Elise stared at the floor. That hurt. Because she could have stopped it. Maybe not years ago. Maybe not when we were children, and they taught us that obedience was the same thing as love. But she could have told me sooner. My mother's eyes watered, but I couldn't tell whether it was guilt or outrage, or simply the inconvenience of being seen too clearly. You have no idea what we've carried for this family, she said. Your father built everything you have. My father barked a humorless laugh. Your grandmother's money built half of it. There it was. A truth so ugly it almost made the whole room brighter. He realized too late what he'd said, because my mother turned her head sharply toward him. My grandfather had died years before I was born. Grandma Evelyn had held the family together after that. She had taken over records, investments, and expansion plans, while my father played visionary in public and borrowed his own legacy from her in private. He had spent years acting like he'd built the empire by himself while she kept the ledger. And now he was admitting, in the middle of his own living room, that the inheritance he wanted to control was money he never really deserved. Noah spoke then, voice calm and deliberate. You don't get to call this protection when what you're really afraid of is losing control. My father looked at him with open hatred. You have no place here. No, Noah said. But I know what a bully sounds like when his voice starts to crack. For one dangerous second, I thought my father might actually throw him out. Then Elise stood up fast enough to knock her chair backward. There's more, she said. My mother's face went white. Elise! I sent the copies to the attorney, Elise said, staring at me now, tears finally gathering in her eyes. I didn't know how to say it to you, so I sent them to the attorney first. What copies? I asked. She swallowed. Grandma's last letter. My throat closed. My mother looked at her daughter as if she had betrayed her personally. You stole from my desk? No, Elise said. I found what you hid. My father's voice cut through the room. Enough. But Elise was already walking to the coffee table, pulling a folded envelope from her folder. Her hand trembled as she held it out to me. Grandma wrote this for you, she said. Your mother said not to give it to you until the trust was settled. I found it in her study after she died. I took the envelope with numb fingers. My grandmother's handwriting was still the same, slanted and neat, the loops on her letters elegant even in old age. My hands shook so badly I almost tore it opening it. There was only one page inside. Mara, if you are reading this, then they have already tried to make you doubt your own eyes. Do not let them tell you that love is a liability. Love is the one thing they cannot monetize unless you surrender it. If your father pressures you over the trust, look to the ledgers from the foundation renovation account. You'll know what I mean. And if you ever need courage, remember that I did not leave you money. I left you choice. I had to sit down. Noah crouched beside me, but he didn't touch me until I nodded. The room, which had been full of elegant lies, had gone so quiet I could hear my own pulse. The renovation account, the Evelyn review, the shell vendors. The line in the letter clicked into place. My grandmother had known. She had known my father was moving money. She had known they would try to hide it behind my marriage. She had planned for this. I looked up at my father, and he knew it in my face before I said a word. You stole from her, I said. His expression went rigid. Be careful. No, I said, rising to my feet. You be careful. Because I'm not a scared daughter in your house anymore. I'm the trustee. My mother whispered, Mara, please, you don't get to beg now. The front door opened behind us. All of us turned. A woman in a navy blazer stood there, with a black folder in one hand, and a city badge clipped to her belt. Sorry to interrupt, she said, looking around the room. Is Richard Collins here? My father went very still. The woman's eyes landed on Grant. You must be Mercer. Grant nodded once. Detective Harris. For the first time, my father looked genuinely alarmed. The detective stepped forward. We'd like to ask Mr. Collins some questions about a series of financial transactions connected to the Collins Foundation and the estate of Evelyn Collins. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father said, This is ridiculous. The detective opened the folder. We have enough to start a formal inquiry. We also have testimony from 2 board members, a forensic accountant, and Mr. Mercer's records. I stared at Grant. You called the police? He looked almost apologetic. After your father tried to pressure me into altering the report, I started documenting everything. My father's face turned the color of old paper. You think you can ruin me over a few bookkeeping discrepancies? Bookkeeping discrepancies? Noah said. You tried to destroy my marriage and steal from your own daughter. My father turned on him. You don't belong in this family. Noah's expression didn't change. No, but I married into a family that taught me exactly what kind of man you are. That landed harder than any shout could have. The detective stepped closer to my father. Mr. Collins, we're asking you to come in voluntarily. My mother made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Richard, he didn't look at her. For the first time, I understood something terrible about my mother. She had spent so long helping my father polish the image of the family that she had mistaken the image for safety. Now the mirror was breaking. My father tried one last time to recover his authority. "Mara, think about what this will do to the family." I looked at him for a long second. Then I said, "You should have thought about that before you used mine." He stared at me, and maybe in some hidden corner of himself he expected me to soften, to apologize, to become the daughter who made this easier. But I'd spent too many years being easy for people who were never kind. The detective moved in. My father gave one furious look around the room, as if he expected the walls themselves to object. When they didn't, he straightened his jacket with a gesture so stiff it looked painful and allowed himself to be escorted out. My mother followed him to the door, then stopped and turned back to me. Her face had changed. The composure was gone now. In its place was something smaller and older, almost childlike in its panic. "Mara," she whispered, "please, don't do this." I looked at her for a long time. I had imagined this moment so many times over the years, but I had always imagined rage. I had not expected sorrow. "That's the problem," I said quietly. "You think I'm doing this." She froze. "I'm not," I said. "You did this. You did it when you taught me love was conditional. You did it when you taught Elise silence was safer than truth. You did it when you thought my life was something you could manage if you wore the right perfume and smiled at the right people." Her eyes filled then, and for a moment she looked almost human to me. Almost. Then the detective asked her to step aside, and the spell broke. The weeks that followed were ugly in the way real consequences usually are. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just paperwork, interviews, phone calls, and the long, humiliating process of learning exactly how much damage wealthy people can do when they believe their name is a wall. My father was charged with financial fraud and attempted coercion involving trust administration. The inquiry into the foundation uncovered far more than I had known. Shell reimbursements, falsified invoices, and donor money rerouted through renovation contracts that never should have existed. The board froze the accounts. The local papers got hold of enough to make the Collins name ugly in print for the first time in decades. My mother was not charged, but her fingerprints were all over the social side of the sabotage. She had organized the meetings. She had spoken to lawyers. She had helped build the false narrative around my marriage. And when the boards and donors pulled away, she discovered that the woman who had spent 20 years being admired for her elegance had almost nothing left when the admiration disappeared. Elise moved out of their house the same week. She called me 3 days later from the parking lot of a grocery store and cried so hard I could barely understand her. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I should have told you sooner. I wanted to be harder than I was. I wanted to say she was too late. Instead, I said, I know." It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was truth. And that was a start. Grant Mercer handed over every file he had. He lost a wealthy client, and probably made a few enemies in circles where people like my father preferred silence over evidence. But he never blinked once, not even when my mother tried to imply he had been the one manipulating me. He just looked at her and said, "No one manipulates anyone into telling the truth." That line stayed with me. Noah and I did not magically heal, because the worst lie in our lives got exposed. Real marriage is not a movie montage. There were long nights after the arrests when we sat on opposite ends of the couch and admitted things we had hidden because we were afraid. He told me how much it had hurt to be looked down on for being poor. I told him how deeply I had internalized my parents' voice, how sometimes I heard my mother in my own head before I heard myself. He told me he should have trusted me with Claire from the beginning. I told him I should have trusted him enough to ask before I assumed the worst. Claire came to dinner one Sunday with a knit cap over her red hair and eyes so bright with exhaustion they made my chest ache. She thanked me for not making her illness into gossip. I nearly cried watching her laugh at Noah when he burned the garlic bread. That was the moment I understood something my grandmother had tried to tell me for years. Family is not the people who can hurt you the most. It is the people who stay honest after they could have lied. 6 months later, I stood in the same downtown office where my grandmother used to keep records and sign the documents to establish the Evelyn Collins Fund for Women's Housing and Legal Aid. It was not the biggest thing my inheritance could have done, but it was the thing that felt most like her. Direct, practical, merciful. I made sure there was a clause in the trust that kept it out of my parents' reach forever. My father eventually took a plea deal. He would spend time in prison, though not nearly as much as I wanted him to. Wealth always seems to buy time, but he lost the company, lost the foundation, and lost the illusion that his name could protect him from consequences forever. My mother sold the house 6 months after that. The last I heard, she moved into a smaller place near the river, where she could no longer host dinners that felt like interrogations. Elise started working for a nonprofit that helped adult children navigate financial abuse. She told me once, over coffee, that every family has a script until somebody refuses to read their lines. I told her she sounded wiser than I remembered. She laughed through tears. That's because I'm not talking to Dad. We both knew that was true. And Noah? Noah stayed. Not because I needed him to rescue me. Because, after all the lies were stripped away, he was still the man who brought me tea when I shook, who sat through depositions without making himself the hero, who apologized when he hurt me, and never once tried to own the pain he had caused. We sold the old house with the cracked porch and moved into a smaller one closer to the lake, where the windows catch the morning light, and the kitchen has room for 2 people to bump shoulders while making coffee. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that knock on the door, how easily I could have dismissed it. How close I came to letting my parents turn my fear into obedience one more time. But then I remember Grant Mercer standing in my rain-soaked doorway holding the truth like a package I had been too afraid to accept. I remember my grandmother's letter. I remember Elise finally saying the words she had swallowed for years. I remember the look on my father's face when he realized money had not bought him immunity. That is the thing about karma. It does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes as a private investigator on your porch. Sometimes it comes as a daughter refusing to be controlled. Sometimes it comes quietly, through court papers and exposed lies and one final dinner where nobody gets to pretend anymore. My parents thought they were sending someone to spy on my marriage. Instead, they sent the man who helped uncover their own. And when the truth finally came knocking, it was my turn to open the door.